When it comes down to sex, when it comes down to violence, when it comes down to culture, when it comes down to all these things, our culture doesn't want to talk about it. And yet, when we have mindsets that sound to be the most well-rounded, fairest thing when it comes to sex politically, men, women, whatever, it actually produces violence. We're going to get into this. This topic was a little bit sidetracked from a question that has to do with dating in Latin America, which has a lot of flack for men. And it's really horrible how that comes across. By no means, especially myself included, living in Latin America part-time, do I promote anything which has to do with harming another culture or having power over them in whatever ways. But to say that somebody is violent without ever looking at it, to talk about sex without understanding it, without allowing its nature to take it to be expressed with your expression, it puts ourselves in worse positions and, as we'll talk about here, is violent by its own nature. That judgment, that canceling, that cutting things out of masculinity is violent and forces violence. Let's get into it. So the more that we don't talk about sex, the more that we don't talk about sex and how it affects men, how that men go and find sex, and even saying that sounds like it's a horrible thing. The more we take sex out of our culture and our culture's ability to talk about it, the more that we rely on a social definition of what our sexuality is. And when we realize how bad that is, and let's look at the results of it. Why are women so upset that they want to cut sex out of the culture, or men talking about sex in certain ways out of the culture? It's because somebody else was defining their sexuality and they didn't have choice. And now we're doing the same thing to men. And one of the things that I've always known is being a dating coach, and from day one, well, maybe not day one, but day 10 or something like that. I started out in 2006, and by 2006, by like a couple months into it, it was like, man, this whole pickup stuff is weird. Like, I'm involved in it, and I don't have any shame whatsoever in it, but there's something really beautiful about it. Let's find the beautiful thing in sex. And so in these questions that talk about that, I really want to understand, I want you to understand that. It's important for men to privately be able to talk about this. I think in order for men to have wisdom, in order for men to build good families, in order for men to have higher thoughts, in order for men to have virtue, meaning the goodness inside you, we have to be able to talk about sex. And we're going to talk about it in ways that are socially unacceptable. It's just horrible that people get demonized for it. I think it's horrible that there's great dating coaches out there that transition to be life coaches and they're like, hey, that was in the past. That was in the past. Man, I have plenty of the past, but there's something beautiful about what we are born with in terms of masculinity. All right, so let's get to this question. And this question has to do with dating abroad. And so that's something that I think is a great thing. I think dating and having options is an amazing thing. There's so much that I could talk about philosophically to it, but there's all sorts of arguments that say, oh, you're taking advantage of cultures, or you're getting a buy because you're an American. And that to me is one of the most disturbing things. I'm sorry, this is a little bit of a rant beforehand. And the reason why it's disturbing is that's under the assumption that because we, and let's say the United States, where I live and where I'm from, we have such a higher thought that we think that we're at so much of an advantage that another person's choice to like us, another person's consent, another person's ability to express themselves in one of the most born-to-be natural ways, sexually, cannot be had because they're at such a lower level of thinking. And that is a terrible, terrible thing to do. It's one thing to have an argument of how poverty and how government and politics affects one's decisions, choices, and places in life. But in order to repair that, if we take away and dehumanize them, literally, say that they are incapable of making a choice, that's pathetic. This argument, that's violence. That is violence by every liberal term of violence. I'm robbing somebody's choice and dehumanizing them, making them subhuman in their thinking because they don't have the mentality that I was born with. And the only option I have as an American man is to be with American people, American women, or you could say American men, of my class, that are capable to make the same choices that I made because of my privilege or situation. That is disturbing. Now, in the reality of this, I've dated people all over the world from Western countries, because now it's not just poorer countries, or it's not just West, because it used to be like if you went to Europe, it'd be, oh, you're just getting it easy. And now it's like poorer countries. I live part-time in a country which is not nearly as economically well as the United States. There's tons of problems there. I'm very aware of them. And this is the other thing that I want to say about it. I've had relationships, friendships, non-sexual relationships with tons of women in Latin America. And my American female friends say how disgusting and disturbing that is, because one, I'm taking advantage of them. Two, I convince myself that I'm helping people and I shouldn't be, or something. Like I'm trying to make myself feel good for my, excuse me, I'm trying to make myself feel good for my patriarchal guilt or something like that. And here's what I see, man. I've had women who are my friends, who I have not had sex with, beg me for their lives so that they can feed their families, and beg to have sex with me and me not have sex with them because there's so much poverty. And these are friends. These are people that I have non-sexual relationships with. I've watched people go through horrible things, like things where they don't have enough to eat so that their kids that they're pregnant with have medical problems. I've seen all sorts of stuff like this. I've never seen any one of those American women help them and even tell me not to help them, even though they're my friends. That's how fucked politics is. That's how disgusting it is. And if in any moment I have sex in a way that is politically incorrect, that should then prove how disturbing this is. It's so gross. Man, in sex, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to mess up. We should be responsible for those things. This doesn't mean that I encourage violence or harm towards anybody. But if we don't understand that we are going to make mistakes, we're put in a position where we can't learn the highest values of humanity. And I really think this, and it's tough. Like, it's the argument where everybody goes, rape or molestation, all of things which I have been a victim of. A lot of times worse than most people. And then because I'm a man, it's not good enough. I hear the craziest arguments with this. It's just horrible. So when we get into sex, it's very important that we can talk about it. Very important. In talking about it to men, there's going to be things of strategy. Oh my God, what a horrible thing. There's going to be things about how to have sex in rough ways, how to have sex in ways where violence is being asked for, even though it's not actually violence, but like rough sex. In that, there's going to be things where we might want to have sex and not be monogamous. There's all sorts of things that men have to talk about. And what's even more important about this is if there is somebody who has had abuse or violence in their life, there's going to be talk about that. And it's very important that we have to talk about that. Very important. Very. If it isn't talked about, it gets repressed and forced into certain situations where people break. And then part of that breaking is, I don't want to listen to anybody. I'm just going to react to do whatever I do. It is a horrible, horrible thing. In all of this, I started out thinking I was going to talk about something, but I'll turn it into another video. But I want to say this. Sexuality is definitive of us. Society is not. We need to understand that sexuality is in our nature. We cannot put nature in a box. Society is there for us to have rules. Society is there because we have many, many people, and it has to come from higher thought. But higher thought or no thought, sexuality has the same plane of human experience. This is very important to understand. It is of nature. No matter how good our society is, no matter how evolved it is, no matter how much it builds structure, which is great. I am such a fan of it, and it's so important that we have it. That society is not going to override our born-to-be qualities, which is how to socialize. It can influence them massively, but it can never put it in a box. We'll break that box. It can never put in that the body needs food in a box. It can never put in that our minds are going to produce ambition, that our minds need to be clear. We cannot hack those things. We can make them better, we can change them, we can augment them, but we cannot completely control them. We don't have that power. And in order for society to become good, first we need to understand our powers. We need to understand the range of those powers. Your sex life needs to be expressed. It needs to be filled. It needs to make mistakes. It needs to learn how to correct those mistakes. It doesn't need to be canceled or harmed or hurt unless we're causing violence in extreme ways that can't be changed. And when we talk about violence, I'm not calling for men and women who say that dehumanizing a complete other culture and saying that they're so stupid or so unevolved or less than us, which is the most colonialist mindset you can have, is so dumb, so unequipped that they can't choose whether to like us or not because we have too much power. I'm not telling you guys that you guys should be imprisoned. I'm telling you to have a discussion that's not filled with blame and hysteria and all this sort of stuff, to be able to look at the answer, to look at finding out how to do things better. That's how society should work, instead of through force and fascism and all this other sort of stuff. Bullying. So we need to do that with sex. We need to understand its nature, understand its range. And when we can understand ourselves and connect and communicate with other people, this is how compassion is built. And that's what we should be working towards. Force is something which is not cool. I get it, it's necessary. But it causes damage, pain, violence, hurt, harm. It cuts certain things out in order to get its way, and it's usually fueled by an intense amount of immaturity. And when force is not met with wisdom, meaning looking at all the variables, looking at the history before it, and the history it's going to produce, projecting its future, it is violence. It is immaturity. And that's what we need to cut out of the masculine and feminine. All right. What an interesting video. Now let's get into the sex question.